Cybersecurity is a major concern for organizations of all sizes in every sector, in every country around the world. Failure to protect your network and cloud can cripple your business, sometimes inflicting terminal damage. We're accustomed to reading about security audits, firewalls, phishing, malware, ransomware, the list goes on. There are, however, other key elements to consider as well when protecting your network. Well, Cloud Managed Networks' Jane Michelle Clark is with me to discuss the main reasons why networks crash today, some of which may surprise you, and how you can protect your firm. Welcome, Jane Michelle. Now, I think no one can be in any doubt about the importance of having strong cybersecurity processes in place. We're seeing more requirements too from insurance companies on their clients to prove that they're doing absolutely everything they can in the right way. Well, we're going to be talking about why solid disaster recovery plans are so essential in a moment. But first, if we can, let's just explore some of the key reasons why networks might crash today, considering there are so many fail-safe systems in place to prevent that happening. It might be quite a surprise to some people. So is it just quite simply that some IT departments have become complacent?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. We have become so used to things working and working the way they should that we figure if we're, IT professionals figure that if they're vigilant, they continue to monitor their network, that things are going to work and continue to work. Unfortunately, that's not true. There are five main reasons why networks crash. Number one has to do with power failures. We've seen a dramatic spike over the last 12 months in terms of countries around the world experiencing more power failures than ever before, partly because people are working from home and the distributed network was not something that was planned for in terms of infrastructure spendings and upgrades. So we've seen power failures knock out data centers. Number two on the list, to our surprise, Mother Nature. Wild, crazy floods, fires, and what have you, $210 billion worth of damage last year, according to the insurance companies. According to FEMA, which is the American Emergency Response Organization, they say that companies, at least 30% of the companies that get hit, the small to medium-sized enterprises are never able to recover. And one of the reasons for that is because they cannot get their networks up fast enough online. They don't have the data that's recovered. And so they aren't able to serve their customers, or at very least, it takes them so many years to recover from that. So Mother Nature and power failures are two unexpected ones. What we do expect, though, is problems from software. And that is another major reason why. So either it's because there have been upgrades to software, the patches have not been put through properly. Actually, maybe the actual software integration was not done correctly. That's a problem. Or the patches were not done properly. They were not deployed across the entire network, or they got deployed, but the people who are not in the office anymore did not necessarily do the upgrade the way they should have done, opening up a door for a cyber bad actor to get in there and install ransomware or malware, something else that's going to cause all kinds of problems. So we look at it when we are managing things on behalf of our clients, we make sure that those upgrades are done regularly. Any third-party managed service provider is going to be there to help to ensure that upgrades are done correctly, that the integration between software that's existing as well as new solutions that you bring in does not take the system out. We also are there to make sure that on a day-to-day basis that things will continue to operate the way they should so that people in the company can focus on the tasks that they need to do that are mission critical for the business to move forward. The fourth reason why systems crash has to do with hardware. Hardware gets obsolete, it gets old just like we do, and sometimes needs to be replaced. And unfortunately, especially lately with the economy being the way it is, companies have not been investing in those upgrades the way they need to do. So it's a question of being penny wise and pound foolish. And the last reason has to do with human error. Sometimes it is just a simple mistake, a policy not being looked at the way it should. But in the case of a coder making a mistake, that could take out a network. The most famous example or the most widely reported one was the AWS. One little line of code that was a mistake, failed their system for hours and affected people around the world. So unfortunately, we know though that 85% of the problems that happen with systems crashing, data being breached, if the company had had good breach response plans and data recovery processes in place, they'd have been fine. Unfortunately, that's not always the case.
Indeed. I mean, you said at the start the number one reason for network crashes and data loss comes from power failures. But what can companies do to protect themselves against that?
Um, Anybody who's in the business are going to tell you that a sudden loss of power can take out your operations completely, whether it's for a few minutes or far longer terms. So the other thing you need to consider is what happens when the power comes back on. Sometimes the way that that power gets restored can damage equipment because of component burnout. In both cases, regardless of what's happened, data can be lost, files get corrupted, equipment gets damaged. Okay, it's going to sound a little bit obvious, but when you've got mission critical services that depend on IT, it's absolutely imperative that you can maintain that power 24/7, 365 days of the year. And to do that requires, as a minimum, a secondary power source and an automated transfer switch or an ATS. For many organizations, they're also going to need a generator. When that utility grid goes down, and as we've said, it does go down, the following things have got to happen in a fraction of a second to ensure that the critical services and the data remain accessible to all of your stakeholders. Obviously, you want to make sure that that ATS should immediately transfer power to your backup system. Usually it's a UPS or uninterruptible power source, and that acts almost like a battery backup. At the same time, that ATS is going to make sure that that generator starts up, assuming, of course, that the organization does have a generator. Once that power gets restored, the generator is going to run until the current starts flowing again and is stable. At that point, the ATS is going to tell the system, "Hey, everything's good. Let's transition things back from the generator to that primary power source." So we always recommend that clients get a UPS because that UPS will keep your networks, your equipment, your point of sale terminals. And for a retailer, that point of sale is going to be really important. You keep the point of sale terminals, the laptops, and other critical tools running in the case of a power failure. So they'll help prevent that data loss. They'll help prevent the damage to your equipment and make sure that you're able to shut down safely, even if you don't have a backup generator. And sometimes those few little minutes of
Mm.
extra time, that buffer that lets you shut down safely, can be the difference between you being able to get up and running or not, and be able to do so quickly and effectively. So the other thing that you can do is if you connect your routers, your modem, and your access points to your UPS, you're also going to be able to use your Wi-Fi in an emergency, and that can be critical, especially if you need help getting out there. It'll also give your employees time to tether their laptops to their cell phones, and that's another thing that we recommend when we look at clients and go in and help them put together their disaster recovery plans, just in case.
What if a company, Jane Michelle, doesn't have time to shut things down safely, or the network crashes for other reasons? What happens to things like current transactional information, clients' personal data, and the company's proprietary information, including R&D data? How can that be protected, especially if the network crashes because it's been breached and is being held for ransom?
Well, that's when it's really critical, not only to have a solid backup plan in place, but a full disaster recovery plan with the software solutions that will let you enact that plan the way it needs to be done. As part of the work that we do in conducting security audits and network assessments for our clients, we always go in and check to make sure that the companies are going to be able to get back up and running, that they can resume operations as quickly as possible without losing that data. And what we've been finding is probably going to alarm some of the people listening to this, that few companies that we work with, few companies that our partners have worked with, are fully protected. And what's scarier is that fewer still practice these disaster recovery protocols and don't try to restore their systems when things are going fine. We've also found that, um, and it's normal, companies will, they upgrade their systems, but as they start to replace these legacy systems, and many organizations have been forced to introduce some of these upgrades a whole lot sooner than they planned to because of being forced to work remotely. So now they've had these highly distributed networks that got introduced a lot sooner, and they've had to support what is a newly remote workforce, and they've got stakeholders around the world. So as they've been doing that, their disaster and backup recovery plans had to be catapulted forward. The problem is that not all organizations had a good approach to be able to look at. So now a lot of companies are saying, what makes sense is before we go to have everybody working again, it's now time to come back and reevaluate what we've been doing because, and it's really critical because today organizations capture, they use, they retain far more data than was the case even 2 to 3 years ago. So as that data capture increases almost exponentially, and with greater adoption of AI and greater use of IoT data, we've got the data coming in from these IoT devices. We have far greater data management requirements than was the case a couple of years ago. And all experts know that the requirements are going to continue to escalate. And at the same time, we're seeing converged architecture starting to replace all these multi-tier architecture. We're seeing greater migration to the cloud and a whole lot of diverse applications being used, whether it's to help companies with their day-to-day operation of their business, to ensure better communication. We're seeing new applications get developed in terms of stakeholder management. And some of the legacy backup systems can no longer work effectively with these new solutions. As a result, these legacy backup systems can no longer guarantee that you're going to be up and running again quickly if disaster strikes, especially, and this is a thing that sometimes people don't think about, especially if your architectural infrastructure has changed since that system was first introduced. Virtualization, the traditional tape backup that everybody used, it's no longer enough. They're not going to be able to guarantee that you're going to get up and get going and that everything can be reinstalled, reconfigured, and verified so that your operation can resume the way that you want it to. Today we need more things, we need snapshots, we need the live migrations and full replication. And when I say the word replication, it gives you an idea that you want to be able to have an identical replica of all the data, all the applications that you use on a regular basis, and your infrastructure architecture somewhere at an offsite location. When you're doing these snapshots, you get to protect the data. You also get to restore things if even a small event happens. So someone messed up with the point of sale information they collected, they can now put it back. A hospital has a problem, they need to go back and look at it. All of these could be done when you're taking the snapshots. With replication and multi-cloud backup solutions, and I say multi-cloud on purpose because it's not just a cloud out there in the sky. We've got server farms everywhere. You want to make sure that if you, in the event of a network crash, you're going to be able to get up and running in moments. If you do track everything properly, you'll be able to do that with no data loss, no time loss, no harm to your reputation or your bottom line. One of the partners that we work with and specialize in is considered best in class by Gartners and others that are respected in the field, and that's the approach that they take. They say you need to put things in place, take the snapshots, do what you need to do, and stay on top of it all the time and practice.
So apart from all that, what are the key things that companies need to be considering when they're putting together their business recovery plans in the event of a network crash or data breach?
In the event of a data breach these days, unfortunately, it's not same thing with security things. It's not a matter of if, but when, unfortunately, is the phrase that we hear all the time. But number one would be RPO. So the recovery point objective. You got to figure out just how much data you are really prepared to lose, and both from the stuff that you've been collecting on a regular basis, as well as from the data that you're going to lose while the system's down. And that's, for some organizations, that can be a critical thing to consider. Number two is your RTO, or your recovery time objective. In other words, how much time are you willing to have for that particular application or your network to be down, all the while taking into account the impact that it has on all the other systems that are running, your business overall, and more importantly, what your clients, internal and external, expect and what they need. Because at the end of the day, it's your brand's reputation on the line, and ultimately that's what you need to make sure that your bottom line remains healthy.
So it sounds like there's rather a lot for the average IT department to consider. For companies that can't afford to have experienced security specialists on staff 24/7, what's the answer for them?
Well, increasingly, IT professionals are looking to companies like us, to third-party experts, to help. They're also engaging backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service firms to be able to help. The question I'm always asked is, why a third-party company? I would imagine that would be a question for your listeners too. The biggest reason is the peace of mind that you get from knowing that there's a team of experts that are ready to step in if your system goes down. They will have dealt with these types of problems on many, many occasions, and they know exactly what to do and the steps to take in what order. Hopefully, people listening, they're only going to go through this once, if ever. But you don't want to be figuring things out for the first time when everyone in the company is breathing down your neck. According to disaster recovery experts, even companies that routinely practice restoring their systems, and as I said before, a really small percentage of firms actually do that. These firms, they still flounder when disaster strikes. I mean, there's so much they have to deal with it all at once. And that's why over 20% of companies that manage their own backup are unable to restore all the data when disaster strikes because of the errors that can occur in that backup process. You need somebody who knows what to do. Bringing in disaster experts to work with your IT department, your senior management ahead of time to go over your disaster recovery protocols and your procedures while you're starting to put the plan together. By using people like that, you will come up with an approach that's going to be right for your company. You'll also ensure that you've got the right equipment in place and the right solutions ready to go and at standby. And it's the type of thing that is most definitely not a one size fits all. You cannot go on the internet and say, what do I need to do? But even still, you need a disaster recovery expert to help you figure out which are the applications that you need to restore first, which are the ones that are most critical given your overall business needs and goals. So it's not just about getting the system going, but based on what's important to you as an organization, what your brand represents, what are the things that you absolutely have to deliver services, especially if you're in an industry like healthcare or something else where it can be hugely important that certain things get up and going as quickly as possible. One of the other reasons why our clients and others look to outside security experts, to disaster recovery service providers and the like is the savings perspective. A couple of reasons there. You get to move things from a CapEx, from your capital expenditure budgets into your OpEx budgets. And that's a great thing to be able to do in terms of cash flow because you're not amortizing the costs over a period of time. But the actual costs are actually lower. You gain the ability to have all that state-of-the-art technology working for you without continuously having to invest in the newest, the latest, the best systems software that's out there. And people that are outside services, they are not married to any one manufacturer. They're choosing the best in class for each of the things that they are bringing online and working for you. So you get updated systems, you get experts working on your business at 24/7, an expert that you could probably not afford to have on your payroll regularly. And on top of that, there's the cost of data. You've got to store all the data that you are tracking, and you get a lot of savings from this in terms of reduced overhead costs there as well.
I've also heard that cybersecurity as a service is starting to be considered best practice in some industries. Why is that?
Although it's not the most important reason, cost savings absolutely is a major consideration for many firms. A managed service provider will have multiple clients. As I was saying before, they have all the greatest technology, but they are amortizing the cost of that investment over multiple clients. So it's a fraction of the cost that you would have to pay both, to have those similar technologies in-house and to have the experts that are at your beck and call. You also save tremendously if you are subject to a massive attack. And these days, we're seeing more and more targeted attacks. It's increased by 29% in the last year. And the early figures for the first part of this year say that those attacks are actually increasing. So now you've got a team of people that are going to be able to work on your business who are seasoned expert. That's all they do day in and day out. They live and breathe this kind of stuff and they're working on your team. So when you factor in the potential loss of revenue that comes from having missed a single key threat vector, the value of these services seems even higher. And probably that's one of the biggest reasons is to ensure that nothing gets missed.
You say to ensure that nothing gets missed. Gets missed. What do you mean?
Oh, it's a good question. Long gone are the days when you could have a simple firewall in place and feel secure. Today, no matter how good that system, today security specialists are saying that it's not enough because there's so many other ways that a system can be breached. Specialists will employ multiple state-of-the-art detection tools. They are rarely bound to a single manufacturer the way you are with a firewall provider. And the tools they use include things such as advanced analytics engines, behavior-based detection software, credential theft and escalation detection tools, And they also use machine learning and anomaly detection algorithms to help ensure that they are on top of almost everything that needs to be looked at. Some of the best ones also have forensic analysis tools that get used in conjunction with these best of class detection capabilities anyway. And when you look at it truthfully, it's unusual for a company to be able to afford the range of protection that you get from an MDR or a security services provider. There's also no way that you can stay on top of what's going on. The updates that are required to keep up with what the cyber criminals are doing, you'd have to have a full-time team, and that's what a third-party company is going to have in place. Going back to what you're asking me about the missing things, firms that specialize in security protection, they have employees on staff who do nothing but that. They have intensive experience in terms of monitoring, investigating, and accurately, that's the accurate part that is important, identifying the attack. They analyze malware and ransomware and detection intrusions from all different types of sources in different types of network situations. They are adept at doing that. They've got a wealth of experience. And the tools that they use have got the backbone of millions and millions of terabytes of data being looked at on a daily basis. These professionals, I said it a few minutes ago, but I'm going to repeat it. They do nothing but eat, sleep, and breathe security, and they are consummate threat hunters, if you will. And they're always honing their craft, always. And as a result, some of them develop what I consider almost a sixth sense when it comes to detecting an anomaly. You know how a CEO can look at a balance sheet and say, oh, there's a problem with that? So are these threat hunters equally capable. And they're as capable at that as they are really quickly responding and remediating the problem so that your risk exposure is minimized. And sometimes those extra few minutes can be the difference between whether or not your system crashes or not. You may have excellent people on staff and they are probably fabulous at what they do, but many of them are already stretched so thin in terms of tending to the day-to-day needs of the organization that they may not always have the time. And at the beginning, you were asking me about complacency. Well, alarm fatigue is real, and it may be putting your firm at risk. According to the Cloud Security Alliance and several others with whom we work, this is a scary stat. Over 31% of internal IT security specialists do not respond to security alerts anymore because of the high number of false positives. So a lot of things get ignored, and that's when things get missed. And that's why we're seeing an increased use of third-party companies. That's why we're getting more work these days to manage the cybersecurity component so that organizations can have their internal IT department focusing on the core business, creating and deploying the applications that will give them a competitive advantage, and figuring out how to leverage big data, AI, machine learning, and all the other tools that are out there. We want to make sure that stakeholders have a seamless experience, that you've got a robust network that is available 24/7 so that your team can do what it needs to do and provide the experience that customers and other stakeholders are expecting.
Network robustness is clearly one of the keys to corporate success. Now, although the pandemic has negatively impacted businesses across the globe in many ways, it may have also been the catalyst for faster adoption of cloud-based infrastructure. But with the dramatic escalation that we're seeing of businesses moving applications and data to the cloud, is cybersecurity such a concern still? Do companies need to worry about protecting their cloud?
Oh, absolutely. Having everything in the cloud has huge benefits, but it also comes with equally substantial security risks. And migration to the cloud can expose vulnerabilities that exist in your current infrastructures. Cloud requires a different security approach than on-premises systems because it's impossible to achieve the continuous compliance that's needed for cloud-based workloads when you're using traditional tools and processes. Gartner, who reports on this regularly, says it's not about whether the cloud is secure. It's mostly about how securely you are using it. And we believe that cloud is great. Cloud service providers will ensure that the underlying infrastructure, includes your networking, the computing, storage, databases, all of that is secure. And they will usually have multiple compliance certifications. But again, we cannot be complacent. It's each organization's responsibility to ensure that the applications are built correctly, that the configurations have been properly and securely set, and that your proprietary and client data is very well protected. And this applies to all services. And that's why we get brought in frequently to say, okay, what is the best way to migrate to the cloud? What are the things that you are going to do to ensure that the systems could be up and running when they need to be? According to that Gartner Innovation Insight for Cloud Security Posture Management report that I was quoting a few minutes ago, I'm just going to read from this. It says, nearly all successful attacks on cloud services are the result of customer misconfiguration, mismanagement, and mistakes. Security and risk management leaders should invest in cloud security posture management processes and tools to proactively and reactively identify and remediate these risks. And that's why our clients come to us.
Why is that? What are some of the risks?
Well, despite every organization's best efforts, and everybody is really working hard these days to make sure things are up and running the way they should, bad actors can get their way into your systems because today major corporations are the bad actors. It's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and so they've got very sophisticated tools in place. Like any other network, your cloud infrastructure comprises multiple hardware and software technologies. So just like any other network, cloud services are prone to the same problems that you might find on your network. Employees and your other stakeholders that connect to your network don't think twice about accessing their personal applications. I think about it. You do your online banking, you do your shopping, those are the common things, but you're often using your corporate device and possibly even going through the network to access some of these. The average person, according to all studies, uploads at least 20 files a month to personal apps, often social media platforms. And every single time they do that, it's an opportunity for an attack. It's another portal in terms of a threat and vector that could be there. And then even if they've done it on their own computer or they've done it on the corporate computer, they then connect to the corporate network. And no matter how great those defense mechanisms are, sometimes bad code can sneak in. It happens. Not surprisingly, last year in 2020, 61% of malware was delivered using cloud applications. And now these cloud applications are responsible for well over a third of all phishing campaigns. And that's a major source of problems we know for a lot of companies. The more that people work together remotely, the more they network and collaborated, again, more opportunities for vulnerability as people are connecting and their computers are talking to each other. The various programs are connecting, sometimes through the cloud, obviously. You might think, okay, well, isn't that the responsible of your carriers? Yeah, the cloud providers, they rely on the telecoms providers to deliver the services, of course. And luckily, over the past couple of years, we've been seeing far greater collaboration between providers in different countries so that load balancing and other shared traffic issues can be resolved. But that means you now have to contend with regulations from other governments and policies and other parts of the world. And that can represent problems too. And sometimes those problems create gaps, and those gaps create vulnerabilities. And you think about it, it's something to consider because the average cost of cloud-related breaches in 2020 was 4.4 million bucks. That's a lot, especially when you factor that's for an individual company. And so when you figure in the loss of reputation and customer confidence that comes with it, it's a pretty serious consideration.
That is a considerable amount per company. From what you're saying, it sounds as though public and private cloud services can also come under attack from cyber criminals. Does it ever happen that attacks such as DDoS or distributed denial of service can prevent users from accessing cloud services, or that other types of malware and ransomware can cripple the cloud altogether?
That happens far more often than any of us would like to imagine. I mean, there are a lot of things that have made the news. The one from last June when the IBM cloud failure came because somebody outside their network, it was a third party, started overloading the IBM cloud network, and it made it impossible for customers in many places of the world, including Washington, D.C., Dallas, London, England, Frankfurt, Sydney. They could not access their regular cloud services, including Kubernetes, App Connect, Watson AI, for over 4 hours. Now, that may not seem like a lot of time, but for a company, that's a half a business day, and that can be hugely important in terms of them being able to go about their business. Another one, last November, AWS had an outage that lasted for 11 hours, and it affected major services around the world. In December, Google got knocked out for an hour, and YouTube, Gmail, and other things were not able to be accessed. It was only an hour, but it just shows you how easily things can happen, even with major players in the space. And, the list goes on. Coincidentally, for a lot of the cloud failures, power failure has been the culprit. In fact, it's been the major cause of cloud outages. And there are some experts who say that power outages represent a larger threat to cloud usage than potential security breaches. So it goes back to our concerns about why networks are failing in the first place. So for this reason, you might want to ask your cloud provider what fail safes they have in place in terms of the UPSs we were talking about, generators, and do they have geographic redundancies? Is it possible that if something goes out in power in one part of the world, they're going to be able to pick it up in other parts? This is definitely a case of not all clouds being created equally. We also recommend that IT professionals include ways to protect their organization in case of cloud outages. Figure out, does it make sense for the type of business that they have to have a private cloud posture? To consider, perhaps if they're looking at a hybrid situation, having private clouds for permission critical applications. What are the things that you need to do to ensure that you're going to be up and running? And what is the best way to configure your cloud and look at that migration?
So, Jane Michelle, what other tips would you give to those watching or listening to help protect their business operations from cloud failure?
There are actually a few things that we suggest to our clients. One, that you should explore a multi-cloud approach as part of your IT infrastructure strategy. That way, if one of your cloud providers' data centers go down, you'll have a failover and you'll have failover redundancy to ensure business continuity, which is hugely important, obviously. And also, if you go with multiple vendors, you won't get locked in and can leverage reduced pricing and market initiatives to your advantage. The second one I would look at in terms of protecting the business from cloud failure would be to identify the SLA requirements for your different workloads and know how your public cloud provider stacks up. As I said before, for mission critical IT workloads, public cloud may not be the best option for you. So a hybrid version might better suit your needs, especially if you don't have the budget in there to go full private. So think what can be done publicly, what makes sense. But before you make any decisions, you've also got to consider the regulatory compliance standards for your own industry, because there are going to be times when you can't adopt a certain type of posture. So again, work with your expert provider, engage a company such as us to come in and say, what is the right approach for you given your industry? And also, you need to involve your insurance company and your legal department. There may be concerns that they would have that way difference in terms of how you migrate to the cloud. The other, or how you continue to operate within it. Also, as part of your breach defense and response recovery plans, you include an alternate way for communication to happen between your employees in case there is an event, in case you do have a cloud outage event. Zoom, Skype are two great options that people can use. They have free accounts that you can get. But if you're going to use something like that, really important that you get your employees to download, install, and have those at the ready long before they're going to be needed. And that you have communicated to your employees what it is that you're going to be doing so that they know how to get up and get running. That being said, Zoom was out last August, affecting millions around the world. So, these things happen. You should also consider creating a private landing page that doesn't require any kind of login credentials so that you can use this to communicate what's happening to your employees and other stakeholders. And obviously, as I said, you're going to have to train your employees and make sure everybody in the organization knows what to happen should the cloud or the network go down. And you're going to have to test your ability to communicate using these other platforms from time to time as part of what you do in terms of your regular disaster recovery protocol testing. Obviously, not just your employees, but you've got to figure out how you're going to communicate with your customers and how you're going to let them know how you're handling the interruption, what it means for them, and how long it's going to take you to get up and going.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground during this interview, but what final piece of advice would you give? A takeaway, if you like.
Let's see. In summing it up, I would say bring in an expert to assess your current security posture and your vulnerabilities. To look at your network to figure out what makes the most sense. Then do whatever you can to protect your cloud, edge, networks, and endpoints. Make sure you train your employees and the stakeholders that connect into your network in terms of the policies and protocols that you have in place. And make sure they get enforced, because we see, as we said, we were talking about complacency before. You made great policies in place, but they're working from home, they're working, they're coming in and out of the office. They may not always follow those policies. So you also need to invest in good data backup and a disaster recovery system, and make sure that you've got really solid disaster recovery plans in place, and that you practice them regularly, and that you get help from a company such as us to make sure you've got the right plans and solutions in place. I'd also urge companies to consider managed services providers to augment your staff and help save costs, improve efficiencies, so that you get to sleep a whole lot more easily at night and save some money too.
Jane Michelle Clark from Cloud Managed Networks, thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgie. It's been a pleasure.